Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our third, um, our third and final meeting for the Culture and Community Culture Toolkit. It is a delight to see everyone's faces again this evening. If you haven't already muted yourself, please go ahead and mute yourself just for a little bit because we're going to do something a little bit different this evening. I'm going to walk through where you can find some larger pieces to go look at for probably the piece that we all unfortunately encounter the most, which is dealing with incident reporting. Yeah, everybody has that same, yeah, look on their face, unfortunately. And so I'm going to take a couple of minutes to show you within the toolkit where some of the resources are. We can take a look at a couple of them together. And then I have quite a few really good questions from within y'all and outside that we can talk about together because I think that Diane is here, and I see Sandy and David and some other, hey, and Susan as well. And I know all of us have had experience dealing with this. So I think that this is one of those times when it's a really great opportunity for us to discuss together some ways that we have approached issues in the past after we talk about sort of a framework for how to set a good environment to go over or to take a report or to listen to someone while they're sharing with you. And then some very basic steps on how to deal with how do you continue to find information? How do you decide what to do? And how do you communicate that to your community as a whole so that they feel like that there is, actual framework for if you say something, is something going to happen? So if I have a problem, will it be dealt with? And if so, how? But before we get started, Matt Reyna, once again, he's this way for me, our affiliate coordinator, has a couple of words for everybody.
Hey everyone, Whitney's nice enough to let me have this small little segment of time, and I'm happy to have a captive audience. As Whitney said, I am the affiliate coordinator for CDSS, and I know some of you are affiliates. Just a note for today, if you do happen to be one of our 501c3 affiliates under our group exemption, there is a filing requirement with IRS, and there's also a filing requirement with CDSS. And so if your fiscal year happened to end at the end of June, those reports need to be coming in around now. So please do turn your attention to it if you haven't. If you don't, you'll be hearing from me. So thank you very much.
That was a very kind way of making your very gentle threat known, Matt. Better better to talk to Matt than the IRS though. So and again, if you ever have questions or need help, we are here to help you with all sorts of, it's to the best of our, or at least if we don't know the answer, we can find someone who does when it comes to 501c3 management. So it's lovely to see all of you this evening. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're just going to quickly look at a couple of resources that I wanted to have an opportunity to chat with you all about. And then an important piece of information here. Where did everyone's pictures go? There they are. Okay. When I'm sharing my screen, I can't necessarily see everybody's hands. So if you have your hand up and I don't see you, if Matt or Sandy, if you could let me know, that would be awesome. So, and Diane is here as well. And thank you for all of your insight the last two meetings, Diane. Your thoughts and discussion have been absolutely fantastic and very helpful for everybody. So, interestingly, when you come into the complaint procedure section of the toolkit, it gives you another guide to go to, and that is the How to Respond to Code of Conduct Reports by Valerie Aurora and Mary Gardner. Frameshift Consulting is a consulting firm that specializes in DEI related complaints and adjudication. So you have to dig a little bit because they currently are not accepting any new clients, but all of their paperwork is still available on their site. So if you click on this, if I start clicking around, it'll open another window, and I don't want to get into that mess right now. But if you click on how to respond to code of conduct reports, and I'll go ahead and put this link in the chat for y'all later, there's a whole block of documents that they have available for you. And one of them is this very long and very comprehensive document called How to Respond to Code of Conduct Reports. And I had a chance to read through this earlier, and it is extremely well put together. And it covers all manner of stages of dealing with what we would call an incident report. And I'm going to do this horrible roll scrolly down thing that's frustrating. But you can see their very overhead view of how to deal with code of conduct reports is here. And I highly recommend taking a look at this document when you have an opportunity. Like I said, I'll drop the link into the chat for you later. This goes into exhaustive detail in a non-dance environment for just in general, how to look at a code of conduct report, how to do it, put one together. So there is a series of essentially steps that you need to think about when you're building out your system of reporting and then how to deal with it afterwards. And it's under these bullet points up here on the top. Whom to complain to, meaning who are you designating in order to take these complaints and listen to the person who's reporting. And we'll call them reports instead of complaints because complaint sounds very heavy. And there are multiple ways to do this. And I can show you a few other options. And I know a lot of you have also seen or put together safety teams to deal with these sorts of discussions. Safety teams can be from one to multiple people. Multiple people sometimes are helpful because it allows more than one viewpoint to be taken in the situation. You'll want to figure out who is doing the following up after a report is taken, how the complaints are handled, how long you want to take to deal with it. Highly important confidentiality. So when someone is bringing an issue to you, you need to do everything you can to make sure that that report remains confidential because they could be bringing you something that's extremely sensitive. And I have a few options I wanted to show you that I think are particularly good for confidentiality and building a safe environment for people to discuss things. Due process, how can the person who has the complaint lodged against them, how can they respond? How is it documented? If there are legal concerns, what should you do? And that's tricky for us to really, any of us to give any concrete guidance on because we're not lawyers. But I will tell you, almost every state has a resource available for pro bono lawyers specifically for arts organizations. I work in Texas. We work with a group called Tala, and they have both accountants, CPAs that will work for free, and lawyers. So, and they will work for pro bono. And I always highly recommend if you can speak to a lawyer when you're coming to a legal concern, please do, because it's always better to talk to a pro than you necessarily try to figure it out yourselves. Talking through like the levels of severity of infractions, and I have a couple of great examples from that. And then pathways for improvement, and then the trickier one, pathways for removal. So if you need to ask someone to leave, what do you need to do to get to that place? What I wanted to quickly chat about first before we got into everything else was talking about how you take a report from somebody. How do you get yourself into place where you can listen to what they're saying. And it's very much in a way, and I would love if anybody else has any advice to add on this, please raise your hand. I can now see everybody, and we'd be happy to hear your thoughts on this as well. But the comfort of the person who's giving you the information is the most important thing. You need to make sure that you are making them feel respected, that they're being heard, and that you're giving them your attention, and that you are taking their concerns seriously. Um, so you want to usually have them in a quiet place. Um, if there are other people that are listening in while they give their report, make sure that person is comfortable with it, because there are occasionally issues where the complaint could be about the person that would be normally taking the complaint. So it's always a good idea to have multiple people available. And I have some great examples of the way that that is shown to people who your safety team is. Um, let them take their time. What you're gathering is their point of view. And when you later talk to the person that they're having an issue with, you want to take the time to let them give you their point of view as well, of course. Um, two key things, which I made a mistake early on in my experiences dealing with complaint procedures. Um, it's very important to ask them what they would like to see happen. What sort of resolution are they looking for? Because that's a key piece of information. If it's just, I don't want to have to dance in the same line as my ex-boyfriend, that's a relatively easy solve, right? We can talk about that. If it's, I want this person removed, that's going to be a larger discussion, right? So it's always good to have an idea about what that person wants to, would ideally would make them happy. You may not be able to give it to them completely, but it's good to know. And the other thing is to avoid discussing potential outcomes while you're still in the information gathering phase, which means that while you are listening to what someone is saying, in order to make sure you're not circumventing your own due process, don't say, oh, well, we'll definitely make sure that they don't come back, unless it's a safety, like a hands-on, like absolute safety issue. Like if someone's assaulted, the obvious, like absolute no-goes, that's different. But for interpersonal relationships, or, you know, someone is swinging in a way that I don't like and I don't feel comfortable speaking to them, don't jump right to the conclusion during the information gathering stage, which seems sometimes counterintuitive because we all want to offer comfort, but we need to make sure that we're engaging this in a fair environment. So that's some of the things that I have learned while learning to do this. I did want to show you, I hate Adobe opening things up without asking me. Go away. Um, so Diane, this is your organization, I believe, Old Farmers Ball. Am I correct? Diane is
Yes, correct.
perfect. So I want to show Diane's summary of complaint policies, because I love this, and if you have 10 seconds to talk about this, the level of complaints that they have listed out for Old Farmers Ball is very good. And so this helps you, as someone taking information in, sort of figure out, where are we on the danger scale? Diane, would you mind talking for a minute or so about these different levels? Because I love them.
Sure. I think they're pretty self-explanatory. We just divided it up into kind of low, medium, and high level, where low level complaints are basically bad dance etiquette. These are based on the dance behavior and etiquette guidelines, which we talked about in the previous session 2 of this webinar series. This idea that these are the behaviors that we encourage in our community. So if you have really robust behavior guidelines, that guide things like, don't dip people without permission, don't grab their hands. If somebody's just not comfortable with the way someone's dancing, it's a relatively easy fix to approach that person and to say, hey, we wanted to offer some dance tips, or to say somebody, came to us that they were uncomfortable with, with the way they felt dancing, and we wanted to give you some feedback and offer you some suggestions, and you can keep it hopefully very non-threatening for the person who's receiving that feedback. High level complaints are ones where it feels like there's personal harm, there's destruction of property, like it's pretty obvious that this is a serious thing and probably warrants at least immediate temporary suspension, if not permanent suspension, while the complaint is investigated. So things like stalking and sexual harassment and threats of violence, those are pretty obvious. And then the middle ground is where there's all this sort of gray area, and you have to treat it on a case-by-case basis. And there's some judgment involved, and that's where the very careful information gathering is really critical. I agree with you 100%, Whitney, what you said about, like, don't make any promises while you're listening carefully and documenting everything that is being said. You want, a lot of, I'm so sorry this happened to you. I'm so sorry you feel this way. I really understand. I'm here to help as much as I can. All those kinds of things that express sympathy and understanding, while at the same time not promising anything, because you need to go to the person who, is kind of being accused and hear their side of the story before you make any decisions about what's going to happen. So that's kind of the big picture overview. The low is pretty obvious, the high is pretty obvious, and the middle ground is where you have to judge a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Diane.
Of course.
So, great example of something that was brought together by a community to sort of think about, levels of infraction. Excuse me. Have another couple of, maybe I could move this. Wow. You ever have like 600 things, like the biggest possible screen, and then it's still not enough screen for all of the stuff that you have open on your monitor? That is currently where I'm at. This is another, I just dropped into the chat the link to Frameshift, and it should have brought you right to the code of conduct section. This is a checklist for how to take a code of conduct report, and I really like this as well. Kind of goes through where to go, the information that you need to get. Is there any other people involved? Make sure that they know where to go, and how to do it. Post, like how to follow, when you're going to follow up, and from whom. So I did want to also, because this is very focused on the victim side, which is important because there have been, unfortunately, multiple instances where the victims were not listened to and not heard. But it's equally important when you're talking to the person that they're having a complaint about to bring it that unless they sexually, they're on that serious thing, you should still treat them as, politely and kindly as possible. But I don't know how many of you have, my mom, who is a social worker, will used to tell us can you rephrase what you're saying in a non-accusatory manner, right? So like use therapy talk to discuss things with people. And I found that this way, and I believe that Brianne actually talked about nonviolent communication tactics, and that's kind of what I'm coming into with this, which is when you're talking to somebody, there's 4 parts to when you're speaking to them about something that's difficult. You make a non-judgmental observation about what's happening, how that makes you feel personally, what a personal need is, and then make a request of them, right? So there's a huge difference when you're having a discussion about something difficult between saying, you hurt me, and when we were in the swing, I hurt it, it hurt me a little bit, or it was a little it was uncomfortable for me. You know, the way you were holding me was made me feel uncomfortable, because now it's I felt uncomfortable instead of you did something to me. So when you did this, I felt that. So it's a small change, but it helps to stage down any aggression, because and it gets people to where they're not necessarily going to come back in a very aggressive manner, which is what you don't want. Um, yes, think Diane is right. I statements rather than you statements. So you want to try to keep it as non-accusatory as possible. So then you would express a personal need after it. Um, when we were in the swing, I felt like you were standing a little too close to me. I need to have a little bit of space between us. Would you let me back up would you open the frame a little bit the next time? Right? Which is a lot easier to say yes to than you pulled me too close and you hurt me, quit it. Right? So, you know, it's a kind of a switch in how you talk to people, but I found it to be a very great de-escalation technique. Would anyone like to add to that? Because I am not maybe explaining it as well as I could. You don't have to, but I love hearing everyone's thoughts on it. So, Brianne, yes. Brianne, I think I lost you. Oh no. Uh-oh. Diane, would you like to chat while I find Oh, there's it. Brianne,
Yeah,
where are you? Oh,
if
go
Brianne
ahead.
is here, she should go.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, it's been a long time since I've actually looked at the OFB procedures that we wrote. So, but I believe that in the OFB document, in the long complete version, not just the summary, I think there's a section that has like some sample dialogue, like some example dialogues for the user, that conveys what you're talking about just now, of like, you know, when we were swinging together, I felt a little bit uncomfortable. It helps me if I have a little more space. Could you put your hand here instead of here, like that sort of thing? And so I would just say, if you dig into the document, I think there's some good examples in there.
Thank you. There are as well, and the frame shift book also has some really great scripts for things. I'm the kind of person that enjoys having a script going into a difficult conversation. So having a couple of those available can be really, really helpful. Brianne, were you able to get unmuted? Oh,
Hey,
I'm
can
so
you hear
sorry.
me?
Yes, we got you. There you are.
Thank you. Sorry, I've been struggling with my mic.
That's all
Yeah, I
good.
was just gonna say, I think you did a really clear job of explaining a little bit of those statements, and I was just gonna reiterate. With NVC, it's this really classic method of communication. The framing will be focusing on the feelings that are arising rather than judgments of the other person. So with your swing example, like Diane was saying, hey, I felt really uncomfortable when you were standing so close to me. Are you willing to like give me a little bit more space? It just makes people have less of a guard up. They don't hear that as such criticism and I did something wrong, because what NVC teaches is that none of us are ever doing something wrong. We're only trying to get a need met. So maybe that person was standing a little closer because they were looking for more intention, or they were trying to hear you better, or they just felt really comfortable. And it's this idea that all of us are only trying to get a need met. And with that, none of us are ever like doing something quote unquote wrong, but we can still figure out how to negotiate with each other. And so even though this is what you want, and this makes me uncomfortable. How can we find that middle ground? And I think when you approach conflict in that manner, it's a lot more successful than going to somebody and wagging your finger at them and saying, hey, you did this thing wrong, and this person's upset about it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I was, let me move my notes over here. Melania brought up a good point. And this is worth a conversation. If something, is happening in a dance, like in an action, that is absolutely okay to be like, hey, now, can we not, please stop that. That's absolutely fine. The nonviolent communication is is in the after part when when there is time to have that discussion open up. That's been my interpretation of it, Brown and Diane. That's like my take on it. So please, if someone has an opposite, I'd love to hear it.
No, absolutely. That's what we're talking about too, is when you're trying to navigate this afterwards with the offending party, not necessarily like speaking up for your needs in the moment.
Amazing. Thank you. Kathy, this is an excellent comment. Do you feel comfortable talking, or are you cool with me reading it? Because this is really interesting. Kathy Brown. So if you can't, go ahead, Kathy.
I can hear you.
Yeah. Would you like to tell us a little bit about,
Sure. I was a high school teacher for 25 years, and we learned a lot of this stuff as part of our job. So, what also with different trainings that I've taken, I went to the Belfast putting on the dance this past spring, along with working with some other organizers of dances that have been held for many years. And what I was taught is that when addressing a problematic person at the dance, to just explain that the policy has been developed by the organization and it applies to everyone at the dance, and that just keep referring back to the policy, and even before you talk to the person, even highlight the parts in your policy that relate to the specific incident that occurred. And never say I or we, because it makes it more charged.
Interesting. Thank you for that. That brings up the policy should be findable and visible.
Right. We have QR codes to the policy and the action plan on a poster right at the dance, and then a paper version of all the materials in a binder to refer to in case something happens.
Amazing. I like that. And then last week, Matt brought up, I believe, never underestimate the power of the bathroom stall.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I
this,
like that. Yeah.
yeah, it's another excellent place to put information. And I want to share something that BIDA does that I think is really important, because it's worthwhile discussing that there are times when people may be uncomfortable verbally telling you when something is wrong. So BIDA has a Google form that they have produced, and it's on their website and visible. So, and I believe they also have a QR code available if people want to do a report at that time. So this allows people an opportunity to give a report about something, and you can kind of see the code of questions that they have available. Allows for people to report things in such a way that if they're not comfortable talking, they can still be heard. I can tell you from personal experience, I have had things happen to me that I was never able to talk to. I was only able to communicate by writing it down, because it was too hard for me to talk about. So I think that this is a great idea to have, especially if there's a way they can do it anonymously. I mean, that makes it difficult necessarily to follow up. But for some people, it's still a good option. And so this is a pretty comprehensive form. Like, it has the anonymous issue down here as well, if you want to stay anonymous completely, or if you want to be anonymous to the person that you are complaining about, for example. I think this is a really, really great option to give people. This is BIDA's safety page that's on their site that tells you who their safety team is, what to do, what some example situations are, and this is easily findable on their webpage, which is, part of, when you're doing any sort of compliance, making people not have to hunt to find the thing that they need for an emergency essentially is part of that. So, and that goes for things like ADA compliance as well, that you shouldn't have to dig around to find the information. Like I've been told before, you shouldn't have to disclose your disability in order to get disability services from an anonymous website. So it should be findable easily, and it is. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll put the BIDA link into the chat as well, in case everybody would like to take a look at their thing. And I think that they're a really great resource as well. Andrew, good question here. Wondering how the I statements idea applies when one as an organizer and acting as an intermediary. And I think that Kathy spoke to that and Maureen did as well. Yeah, that if there's a community policy, reference it. And we've talked about that, making those community policies in our earlier meetings. This is why you have one where it's easily visible, because if something goes wrong, you can be like, behold this poster that you have been staring at for the last, 3 weeks or what have you. So excellent. Any comments or questions before I go ahead and pull something from last week that I think is worth discussing, and I wanted to bring that to everyone. Shay, that's excellent. Yeah. Can I please have your hand here instead of here? That's a great way of describing it. This is very helpful, everyone. Thank you for this. So Maureen, last week, towards the end of the session, you asked a really great question, and I think that this is worth a discussion. Has anyone ever asked a longtime volunteer to step down? Normally, we don't have job descriptions or performance reviews. And volunteer management is another wonderful and sometimes fraught sort of part of being an organizer. And I would love to hear y'all's thoughts on that, because I can open it by telling you that I have done that, and I did it once well and once incredibly poorly. And in my own defense, I was 25 and I was very secure in the fact that I absolutely knew how to do everything at that stage in my life. And I was absolutely wrong at this point. So I would love everyone's thoughts on that, because my inclination at this point in my life is to come at the volunteer issue kind of the same way as one would for a reported incident. So, use those same nonviolent communication tactics to bring up something that has happened. This is how it has made someone else feel or other people feel. This is what we're trying to do. Can you make this adjustment for us? And if that's not possible, then you get into the more difficult question of, thank you for all of your years of service, but unfortunately, this is, this behavior is something, or, that the organization as a whole cannot support. So I would love, if anyone has any thoughts for good wording for that sort of situation, I would love to hear them, because that's a tricky, tricky situation. Or I can tell you how I messed it up. That's an excellent point, Kathy. Give the volunteers stated time period for making the changes. So act like a performance improvement plan almost. Thanks, Diane. Anyone else have thoughts? Why don't you go ahead, Diane, and then I will continue to talk.
I think that if it's possible, it can be framed as like succession planning, and the idea of passing the torch, that that having young leadership is really healthy for the organization. Like, you are fabulous, and we would love for you to continue to be president of the board forever, or the booker forever, or, you know, whatever role that they're filling. But we recognize that we have to look at the big picture of the organization, and it's important to have new blood, and it's important, you know, we really value making space for new dancers, young dancers, blah blah. Um, and so we wanted to talk with you about maybe shifting into a different role so that somebody else could step up and learn to do the job that you've been doing. And so that it doesn't feel as much like you're doing a bad job, you're being fired, but it's in the larger interest of the organization. And also, if possible, trying to find some other role for them to fill so that they're not being asked to leave the board, or they're not being asked to leave, you know, whatever. But you've been the booker for 10 years, and we want to allow somebody else that opportunity. You know, but you're emeritus now, you know, we need your wisdom, we need your advice, creating some kind of advisory role for them so that they're not being sidelined, you know, so honoring them, not just in words, but with some action, and at the same time moving them to some different role.
Amazing. Say, Melania and Greg had similar thoughts. Thank you guys for sharing down there. I'm reading Ken's thing. Interesting. Ken, do you want to speak to that for a moment? Because I'm curious about how that's been.
Yeah, well, that's how the Friday Night Dancers, as we've incorporated, began. I understand it's because there were a group of volunteers who had a lock on the dance, and they were doing it their way and didn't want to do it another way. And so they created another organization, and they said from the beginning, we're not going to have that. You know, you're in for a limited time, and then you have to go somewhere else. You know, you can come back in after a period, but you know, so that is what we're dealing with, and I think that's where Melena's comment about term limits comes from, because she's on our board too, and so that has been useful. But the main thing we're dealing with now with behavior reports is what we do after the reports, and after the warnings and the bans are. We've been notoriously worried about being sued, and so we haven't put names in the minutes, and we didn't even have a list of people who are warned or banned. And so it's just kind of like, you know, there was somebody dancing after the pandemic, and somebody said, you know, we banned that person several years ago. And nobody on the board knew, you know. So it's just like there's a lot of lost information and a lack of follow through once, you know, the behavior conversation has been carried out. And that often the behavior conversation, we have no records of what happened. So that's what we're in the, we need to get a database and records and stop being so worried about suing.
Does anyone else here work with protected health? Oh, go ahead, Matt.
I was just going to say that this is a perfect area for something like that BITA Google form to come in, because yes, of course your dancers or the public could fill out that form, but even people from your board, people from your organization could be filling that out. And that way all that information is kept, and it's pertinent information. Even if it's sort of that anonymous tip, you still are recording, you know, bits of information that may aggregate to something in the future.
Yeah, we have in the past 3 years, I guess, we've had a Google form about people's feedback about the dance in general, and people have used that form to address specific problems with problem dancers. So yeah, we do have a system in place, somewhat of a system in place now. It needs to be a bit improved, but that's why we're here.
We tend to treat it as almost as I don't know, anyone else has had to work with protected health information, but we kind of treat it in the same way as that it's archived. Like, we have those reports in a drive that is secured. So not everybody can get to it. Not everybody, it's a very restricted environment. So the documentation is not readily available to everybody, but it does exist so that we have a record of, you know, not only the reports, but then also what was done about it, so that, you know, we know that, like you said, making sure that we're able to follow up on it. And it allows us to, you know, make sure that we did what we said we were going to do as well.
Do you
Real
have
quick.
that available in some way that can be quickly accessed by organizers at a particular event? Because that's also something that Ken and I and other members of our board have talked about. You know, if somebody is coming to the dance and I'm a new member of the board, I think maybe they've had a ban or some sort of issue raised, but I'm not sure. Like, I need to be able to quickly access that information. And I think we sort of struggled to think about how do we organize this so it's secure and private and easily accessible.
Right. My recommendation always would be so an encrypted or a password, like a protected Google Sheet or something that you can get to on your phone. Google Drive, SharePoint, all of those have options for more secure document management. And I'm a huge fan of color coding things. So like having a sheet which has, you know, the top of it that's essentially readable on your phone. Like, so when you build the sheet, like think about how it would look on a device instead of on a desktop, so that you can scroll through it quickly and find people's names. That's what I would do, and make sure that it's restricted on who has access to it. Love to hear other people's thoughts on that, because the keeping it access, like locked, feels like safer than having a paper list somewhere that someone could get a hold of. But I'm open to anybody else's suggestions for that. But it could just be that I love spreadsheets. So yes, Ken?
I have a question here. I mean, that sounds great for people who are in the first part of this process, where they're in the warning stage, or we've gotten reports, we're investigating, or they've been warned and they're on improvement. But people who have been banned, I mean, I feel like an organization is, you know, that shouldn't be private. That's something that
No,
the board
right.
should know and people should know. And we are one of several dance organizations in the greater DC area. And so we're trying to set a policy where we inform the other, you know, contra and English and square dancers in the area, hey, this person had manifested these behaviors, did not improve, and has been, you know, banned from the Friday night dance for, I think, 4 months, and just letting you know. And here's a picture of the person. You know.
I think that that's fair. And I think that when they've moved to an outright ban, I think that that's a different environment than when you're in the documentation and the mediation stage. Because that's just helpful to know, especially if they're banned for something particularly egregious, you know, like this, you know, that you should be able to let other people know. I think I don't know, I think that there feels like there's a point of severity where, you know, things change, you know. So I'd love to hear thoughts about like how to get that out as well. Like, if I like, you know, picture matter of factness. So, but that's a good question. Yeah. Brian has a good point in there. Interesting. Okay. Real quick, well, I'm gonna scroll up here, because then Brian, is it Brianne or Brian? Because I'm gonna just say it 100 different ways until you tell me to stop. About the legalities of it. I did really quick before we get too far into that. Last week you had asked about is there anything in the toolkit for towing the line, like if somebody is brand new and they're not quite over the line yet, like where in the toolkit can you find that information to deal with that? I would highly recommend, BIDA has a really great, all of the resources I showed you tonight, Old Farmer's Ball, BIDA, and then the larger frame shift has good information in there about how to deal with people who are right on that line, especially old farmers and the BITA safety requirements. And I'll make sure that those are linked. Ella, PatMat is one of my things that I pulled up to. I was going to show you. If you I was going to show everybody that your beautiful reporting system. Would you mind telling us a little bit about your incident report form, Ella? Do you feel comfortable talking?
Yeah, of course.
Amazing.
So essentially we copied ours from BITA for full transparency. We really liked how they did it. And so we adapted it to fit the needs of our community in terms of voice and language that we used. But once a form is submitted, any incidents we have, our safety committee will meet once a month to go over them or more frequently as needed. And from there, what we're working on now in our stage 2 of this process, because it's a newer development for us all, has been how do we log who has been banned and what actions have been taken. And so we have it's kept under Google Lock and Key, and is only accessible to members of the board and our safety committee, but we are compiling our list of anybody who's been banned or asked to leave the dance. Adding a short list of like, these are the reasons why, this is when the ban is lifted, if it is going to be lifted. And we want to make sure that we have a paper copy accessible to our door managers, including photos of these individuals. And it's just we have a really broad age range of dancers who attend. And so we're trying to make sure that in this process of being safe, we're also being fair. So there's a lot of other things going on in the background that I'm not at liberty to talk about at this exact moment in time while we're ironing out those details, but it's been useful because we have such a connected safety committee to the community in and of itself that we're able to even do this process that way.
Thank you. That's really fascinating. Ken, did you have any questions for Ella since she's mid that process right now? Like, I'm curious.
Yeah, I have a feeling I'm going to go to their website and read all about their policies and then go. I actually will be in Philly this weekend, so
come out to one of our dances.
Awesome. So this is very helpful, y'all. This is tricky stuff to kind of get into. And then this is a good question that Kathy brought up. What if a banned person is reformed or evolved? And Diane wrote a great response here about, do you want to just repeat your response? Do you mind, Diane? Because like this has come up in my organization before about people making changes and bringing them back in.
Yeah, and in a comment a little bit higher up, I mentioned that in the OFB guidelines, which is the ones that I'm the most familiar with, we ended up doing kind of a flow chart of what responses would be, and so it was sort of like, there's the initial feedback to the person that, that says, hey, just want, very friendly, non-threatening, wanted to let you know that this was brought up. We just like to offer feedback. And then it completely depends on how they respond. If they say, oh my God, like I had no idea that I was perceived this way. Thank you so much for telling me. Like, I'm so sorry. Like, if the person is willing to let me know who they are, I would love to talk with them directly. Thank you for telling me. If it's just lots of remorse and good intentions, then, then you say, great, so glad that you're open to the feedback, and they wouldn't be banned. They wouldn't be anything. They get another chance. And then you wait and see if they really follow through, especially like, does the behavior repeat in spite of what they say? Like, are the actions matching the words? And so if the answer is yes, then yay, problem solved. If the answer is no, then it sort of like goes back to step one again. So then there's another piece of feedback. Hey, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, but we've had another person come and mention kind of this same behavior. Now, 3 weeks ago, you said that you were, thanks, you were so happy to learn about this, and you're going to be all aware of it, and yet this has happened again. And so it becomes this sort of flow chart of of opportunities for them to improve. And at some point, then it moves to a new level of like, okay, this is the fourth time that we've had to talk about this, and you keep saying thank you, and I'm going to improve, and yet this doesn't seem to be working. And so then you like move to the next step, like how can we help you make this improvement? How can we help you be more aware? And so I won't go into any more detail than that, but it's a whole, like I said, flow chart. On the other hand, if they are defensive and in denial from the beginning, like what the hell? Who are they to complain about the way to look? I have been dancing for 20 years or 10 years or however long. And, other people love when I do that. That the problem is with them. It's not with me. That's a completely different response. And so then the consequences would be different. And so that's how we ended up with this flow chart of if A, then B, but if B, if this, then that. So yeah. Hopefully that will be helpful if you go and dig into it.
Thank you. And I put the link to the Old Farmer's Ball, and it's in the bottom section under complaints and concerns. You guys can take a look in there. Y'all, this has been really helpful and some really good insight from everybody. We have about a couple of minutes left. Does anyone have any other questions that we can answer?
Another thing that's come up for us that we've discussed that I'd be interested in hearing other people's takes on is, so like Ken mentioned, we do have a form so people can submit concerns or complaints. Sometimes, and this has happened more than once, there are complaints submitted through the form, maybe from a new dancer or somebody who was visiting who had some sort of pretty negative experience at the dance, being touched inappropriately or harassed, but because they're new to the dance, they can't name who it was. And so we have a concern that there are dancers in our community who are likely alienating new or visiting dancers. We're receiving these complaints, but they're somewhat hard to act on because we don't know exactly who the perpetrators are. Maybe we on the board could guess who some of the people are, but of course we don't want to operate just on guessing. And so anyway, I'd be interested to hear if there's other people, especially people who also have these kinds of forms, have thoughts on how to handle that issue.
I would love to open that up. Ella, have you had that come up in PatMad? Not to call you out.
No, you're fine. Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Melania, do you want to repeat it, or I can summarize if you want?
Go ahead and summarize.
So if there are complaints being given through a Google feedback form that don't have a specific name attached to them from a newer dancer who doesn't know who someone is there a way that you guys is there anything actionable that can be done on that? Is there a procedure in place?
I see Melinda in the chat. We do ask that people include a description of that individual. And then typically when it's a newer dancer making a complaint, they recognize who the board members or the managers are. So we've created a culture where they'll usually come up and pull one of us aside as they're filling out the report, or we'll fill it out with them. That way if they point it out and we know who it is, we can be like, oh, perfect, that's John Doe, and we've seen it before. So we'll go ahead and then we let them go from there. We try to avoid, it happened for us recently, we try to avoid leaving a complaint without the person who has offended, because it can get messy very quickly if there's no descriptors there.
Yeah, I am. The thing I hear there is you have created a culture where people know they can do this and are acting on that. And we announce all the time that there's a form. We're the board members. If you have anything, every dance, but the problem is nobody listens to announcements. So we don't have time to get into this now, but something about how you created that culture and got a response, your community to respond is worth us listening to.
I'm gonna write that down, Ken, just so we can maybe discuss it later. Greg brought up a good question. How do we measure the successes of our behavior policies? That is an excellent question. and I have my thoughts, but I would love to hear everyone else's thoughts on that. First of all, did that answer your question earlier about not necessarily having enough information? Was that a good answer, Melania?
Yeah, I mean, it's a helpful start. I think that probably we'll continue to receive complaints after the dance through our feedback forms.
Yeah, and
which
our
is important.
feedback form is not designed to be a behavior report form. It is asking about our dance culture and if anything went wrong, but it's not asking for descriptions. You know, it seems like we need to like
We need that.
yeah, we need to have a dedicated form for that. Yeah.
Like, again, that Matt's bathroom. Go ahead. Sorry, Matt. Go ahead.
Oh, just, you know, and this is actually on the same tip of the bathroom thing is, Ken, you're saying we make announcements, we raise our and wave our hands. We're the board or the safety team, whoever it is. We are the people that you need to know to make a report. I would say add a button onto that. Add some kind of visual indicator throughout the night because people forget who raises their hands. But if they're going through a line and they see the yellow button that says talk to me, then that can really help, I think, in the moment.
Sweet. Amazing. And then Greg, really good question. And I think that's one before we run out of time. Thoughts on how to measure if your behavior policy is working? I mean, I would guess lowered complaints is one way of measuring that, but then that may be a question that we can all sit with for a little while, because that's a very, very good question and one I don't have an easy answer to. But I think it's worth the time of trying to puzzle that out. Has anyone gone through that process with their own organizations they'd be willing to share?
Well,
Margaret?
as a librarian, I would say that you create the policies so that you're more comfortable dealing with issues that come up. Having a code of conduct and having a procedure is the success is not whether or not you get any more complaints, because you're always going to have complaints. There's always going to be new people coming in. There's always going to be things that come up, and that's why you have your policies. So I would say the success is based on how successful you feel you are dealing with the issues that do come up.
Sweet. Thank you, Margaret. I love hearing better strategies for things. So I really appreciate that reframe. That's wonderful. So y'all, we are, I believe, out of time, right on the dot. This has been a lovely conversation with everybody. We have barely scratched, I feel like scratched the surface of all the places that we can, you know, dig into things. And it tells Matt and I things that it would be helpful to have future discussions about, so that we have a forum for people to bring things to each other to solve the problem. Because like what my father taught me was somebody else may have already solved your problem. You just need to find them and ask them. So it's been a delight having an opportunity to chat with everybody here. And thank you for all of your time and your good questions and your really amazing like comments. This has been really lovely, and we will be announcing our next affiliate program soon. If you have an idea for an affiliate program, please email either Matt or I. We are open to literally anything. We've had requests on how to use Canva, on how to set up Square, on how to build codes of conduct, on all sorts of things, how to hire musicians, how to book halls, how to read insurance. So anything that might be helpful, send us an idea and we'll do our very best to do it. So, and then Sandy and Susan are both on the board's online task group. They are also great people to talk to if you have ideas. We would love to hear them. So thank you guys so very much for a wonderful 3 weeks together, and I can't wait to see you guys again. So thanks, everyone.